What are the biggest worries for Maryland football?
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com, and host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And today's episode is brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So today we are going to be rating the Maryland football problems and all the worries that I have with Maryland football on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being, I think it's going to be a problem during the year. I'm really concerned about it. It's probably going to be something that holds us back, and I'm really worried about this problem. And one is, of course, being I'm not concerned really at all with it. But since we're bringing up problems, most of them will be at least probably a 6 or a 5, I would think. But maybe there's some problems that you guys think that we have, but I don't think that we have. And we'll see where those things maybe come up in this segment. But I think we have to start with the quarterback battle. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried am I with the quarterback battle and with the quarterback room and who's going to be our quarterback? I'm feeling like a 9.8, like an 8.7. And it should probably be a 10. It probably should be because it's a new position. We lose Talia Tungavailoa, who's the all-time Big Ten passing leader, has every single Maryland record. And you would think when we lost a guy like that has led us to 3 straight bowl games, has led us to 7 wins, to 8 win seasons and he's brought us to places where the program hasn't been. And he's done it at Maryland for the last couple of years at a really high level. And so you would think if you lose somebody like that, the leader of your program, that you would be at a 10 for concern about a new quarterback who hasn't started. It's not a guy that it's like an obvious hand down, he's next up. Like in some quarterback rooms, you're going to know, everyone knows who the next guy up is. For example, at Tennessee, Joe Milton was the guy last year, and everyone knew that Nico, that really talented young kid, was going to be the starter this year. And so at some places, you understand, you know who the starter is going to be. But we had a quarterback controversy. We had to bring somebody in MJ Morris, and we had 2 guys in Billy Edwards and Cameron Edge that have been part of the program. But the reason I'm not at a 10, basically, I don't want to rant too long, but the reason I'm not at a 10 is for a couple of reasons. First of all, I believe MJ Morris is a starter, and I have confidence in MJ Morris because I've seen him play at a high level at NC State. And yes, he's been inconsistent at times. There's plenty of stuff to work on with MJ Morris, and there's plenty of things that he needs to get better at. But what I saw with his talent at times at NC State makes me be like, sometimes it pops. Sometimes it pops on TV, his arm, what he can do with his legs and his athleticism. And I know that I don't think that I should have a 10 at a concern level because I believe that MJ Morris can play well and can surprise a lot of Maryland fans, as well as if he beat out Cameron Edge and Billy Edwards, then that means that he outperformed guys that already knew the offense, that have already been in the system. And if he's outperforming those guys, I feel pretty confident about him coming in. And I'm not saying that Cameron Edge and Billy Edwards are amazing quarterbacks and that the fact that MJ Morris is outperforming them is amazing, but I feel better about him. I feel better about him beating out 2 of the 3 guys in that quarterback room. And it makes me feel like I feel some confidence in him, that he's played a little ball and that he's been around football at NC State for a little bit now, and I know he's really talented, and so that's the reason I'm not at a 10. If I was at a 10, maybe I would be looking at it and be like, I don't know how good he can be. I don't know if he's the most talented player. I don't know if he's an accurate throw of the ball. It's also a new system. If I had almost every question mark about him. But I feel like there's some stuff about MJ Morris that I feel pretty good about with him. And so I leave it at about about an 8.7, I would say, for how worried I am about MJ Morris in that quarterback room. And then let's move on to some of the other problems with Maryland football. So wide receiver depth is a problem that is definitely something that a lot of people have been talking about in our wide receiver 3 spot. And I'm honestly at about probably a 5 for that. I'm honestly not too concerned because I feel like there's plenty of players in that room that are ready to step up and ready to play, whether it's Octavian Smith has had a good couple of years, and we know how explosive he's been since his freshman year, and he hasn't gotten to show it at the highest level yet, but we know some of the things that he can do on the football field, as well as Shalik Knotts has all the bodies. He has the body type and the traits that you want. And then Ryan Manning, I really like his ability to separate and run routes. And we have some other guys, Robert Smith. We have a lot of guys in that room that waited their time, and that, they might have not made their impact yet, but I think they're next up. And one thing about Maryland is the wide receiver room is something that seems to be replenished every year and seems to be like we are usually pretty good at, and we usually bring out the best in our receivers in that room. We have plenty of NFL talent in the NFL to show that, and every single year it seems like we have some good guys. And I could have said maybe last year I was unsure if Ty Felton was going to take a jump that maybe he needed to take, but I saw Ty Felton make a big jump. I've seen receivers in the past continuously make big jumps for Maryland football, and we're not asking someone to come in and be a number 1. We're asking someone to be a 3 or a 4 and to just make a smaller impact, but still have a bigger role. And that's why I'm only at a 5 in terms of the receiver depth for Maryland football. I feel pretty confident, especially in Octavian Smith. I think Octavian Smith might be our best athlete that we have and what he can do overall. And also Braden Wissolowski, what he can do in terms of just getting the ball in his hands. Like when I see him return punts and kicks for Maryland football, mainly kicks, but he looks like such a good athlete. Like he can do different things. And that's a guy you just want to get the ball to, and he can help in the receiver room. There's so many guys in that room that I feel pretty good about making an impact for Maryland football. It's just finding the guys that should play. Finding the guys that should be playing and finding the guys that need to get on the field the most and finding the best guys in that room. But overall, I feel pretty confident in that wide receiver room, and it's honestly not a huge worry for me on the offense side of the ball. Now, maybe somewhere where I'm at a 10, close to a 10. I'm going to say a 9.5 is the offensive line. I think the offensive line for me is close to a 10. Having 5 new starters along the offensive line in terms of Maryland football players is hard, and that's the reason I'm at a 10. And yes, we brought in some transfers. We brought in some good players that are going to play for Maryland football, but that still doesn't lead me to feel a lot better about it. In the quarterback room, it's more obvious with MJ Morris that I've seen him lead a team, but I think it's just offensive line play. It's hard to kind of decipher and see if that guy is going to come in and make an impact and be a top end player for your team. I know in the quarterback room, you don't really know what's going to happen as well, but it's just like along the offensive line, it's just there's too many new guys, and you have to mess with the guys around you. It can't just be one guy playing well. It's really it takes a unit, and if you have a bad spot in your unit, it makes the rest of the unit, it makes it harder for them to play well. And so when I'm looking at our offensive line and bringing in some of these guys, I know last year was also a big question mark, and it came together decently, but it leads a lot to we'll see what happens. And I don't know exactly how that room's going to look, but it feels like a pretty high 9.5 for me for that room. And I'm honestly pretty concerned with how it's going to look day one. It could be perfectly fine, but the thing is, if your offensive line isn't playing well, and that's an actual issue, it affects every single level of your football team. Some position groups, it's like, okay, if one of our running backs not finding a hole or whatever, then like someone else can do that and someone else can run the ball better. Or if one of our wide receivers isn't separating well, then someone else can do that. If one of our linemen isn't doing well, usually the guys down the depth chart are usually not, honestly, just not ready to play. And so if there's a guy on your offensive line that a team can take advantage of, it's really hard to game plan and to help around them. And you got to bring tight ends in to chip and running backs in to help block them. And you don't want to do that because that takes away from your passing game and whatnot. So I think having that offensive line issue and having 5 new starters out there, the inexperience in that group makes me believe that I feel about a 9.5 for the offensive line. Now I'm just gonna do the offensive side of the ball today. Maybe I'll go over the defensive side of the ball next time. But the last room is the tight end room. I'm honestly at a 3 because the biggest question mark about the tight end room is probably the experience. And yeah, Preston Howard and Dylan Wade aren't the most experienced crop, but those 2 guys are so talented that I believe that they're going to figure it out. And what I've heard about Dylan Wade and what I've seen from Preston Howard over these last couple of years, I'm not concerned about that tight end room a lot. I know some people will with losing Corey Dyches because of all that he offered for Maryland football. But to me, I'm not that concerned about the tight end room for Maryland football. I think that it can be a really good unit for this team. I think it can be quarterback friendly. You have 2 different guys in that room. And the only thing is I'm concerned about is probably just not having a guy that's probably a blocker. And I think AJ Sinisky can do some of that blocking stuff, but that's probably my biggest concern when it comes to the tight end room. I love Preston Howard and Dylan Wade as talents, and I feel like they're really good players. So in terms of the tight end room, it's not really a problem with the talent. Like, I don't know about the talent in the offensive line room. I don't know how well it's going to fare. And I have an idea of how talented MJ Morris is, but it's still a question mark. But I know how talented Dylan Wade and Preston Howard are and what I've heard about those 2. And so I'm pretty confident with them playing at a high level. What is the most important game in the second half of our season? I will tell you about that after this ad from the Gametime app. Have you ever wanted to go to a game at the last minute, like a Maryland Terrapins game, but finding tickets is hard? I've been there before. Buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guaranteed, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's a place to find last-minute tickets and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, what is the most important game for Maryland football in the second half of the season? So there's some really important games, and our hardest games, in my opinion, lie on the second half of the season for Maryland football. This isn't going to be who's the hardest, because I've had a conversation about who's the hardest, but I think which game is the most important game in the second half of the season is different than who's the hardest opponent we play. In the first half of the season, if you guys need a refresher, if you guys didn't listen to one of my other podcasts, but I said Michigan State was probably the most important in the first half. And basically, I said that because it was our second game of the season after we played UConn on the 31st. But the reason I believe that the Michigan State game was so important for Maryland football was because it's the first Big Ten game. It's the first real test. It's the first game where we can either feel confidence in our quarterback or not have confidence in our guy. And there's a lot to be said about that, and I felt like the Michigan State game was really important in terms of building up confidence for MJ Morris or whoever the starter may be. And you don't want to lose one to Michigan State and then your guy's not ready to go and people are questioning the quarterback battle and everyone's asking about it going into the Virginia game, and you're in a dogfight with Virginia and that's a game you lose to, and all of a sudden you start 1-2. So I feel like the Michigan State game is really important in the first half of the season, and they're also a really good team that if we don't play well can absolutely beat us. But in the next half of the season, it's more interesting. And basically this is how it's laid out. We play USC at home. We play Minnesota on the road. We play Oregon on the road. We play Rutgers at home. We play Iowa at home. And then we end the year with Penn State. And so I've gone back and forth about the most important one. And it's hard for me to pick a different one than USC. You can pretty much argue anything you want on this kind of schedule, but I think that coming out of our first 6 games, let me make sure it's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, our first 6 games after the Northwestern win, if we're feeling pretty good and we started the year pretty good and we head to USC at home, this USC game has all the makings of an upset. I'm telling you. I went through it the other day. I said, what team are we most likely to upset? It's USC. But I think playing USC at home, that's really important for a program. That's not a team that we have usually played in the past couple of years because they haven't been a Big Ten team, so we don't usually play a USC type of team. But it's also a brand. It has some history with it. Some really good football players come out of the universe or the University of South Carolina, South California, and there's some really top-end talent, and it has a lot of history as a program. But I think that you could argue different parts of our schedule, but I really just believe that USC, the fact that we can, I think, upset them at home. You look at a USC team where they have a new quarterback. They have a lot of question marks on that roster, and it's a team that probably comes in preseason top 25 team, and it's probably a top 25 team when we play them. They have that kind of talent for sure, but it's all the makings of an upset. And then it also is the middle of our schedule, which is also really important. The middle part of our schedule is important. It's going to kind of decide a lot for Maryland football. Like I said, we play Northwestern in the first half of the season, and then you play USC and Minnesota. And then, so you have that little cluster of games, and it's like, how is the rest of your season going to go? A lot of it, I think, is going to determine on that USC game, how this year is kind of determined, how you look at this year. If you beat USC, and even if you still drop your games to Oregon and Penn State, which is probably expected, if you beat USC, you probably feel pretty good about Coach Loxley, who I haven't really seen get a signature upset yet. And a USC game, beating USC, depending on how good they are at that point in the season, I think could be a signature upset. I also thought about Penn State as a team that could potentially be the most important game, because I always feel like we get blown out by Penn State. It just, every time Maryland plays Penn State, I don't know why. It's just like these last couple of years, it's been hard to compete with Penn State. And the weird thing about it is I wouldn't consider Penn State the best team we played last year or the second best team. I would say that's Ohio State or that's Michigan. And we put up a fight against both of those teams. But when we play Penn State, we seem to get blown out, and it's a team that we can't compete with. And so to see where our program's at, it'll be interesting to see if Maryland has kind of fixed their Penn State woes and if we can maybe stay in the game with Penn State for a little bit longer, because we don't play Ohio State and we don't play Michigan. And yeah, we get Oregon, but Oregon's going to be tough on the road. And we do have Penn State on the road as well, but there is an argument to be made for Penn State. I think there's also an argument to be made about Oregon as well being maybe the most important game in the second half of the season. I think you could also argue one of the teams that maybe aren't as good as those three, but are still a solid program. Maybe you argue a Rutgers type of game or a Minnesota, and it's probably not where I would go with things, but I think you could. But to me, that USC game at home, the fact that we get them at home, the brand of USC and all that comes with it, with the history of USC and facing a team that we haven't faced in a while, and then as well as I think us having the best chance at upsetting them with a new quarterback, I think that is the most important game of the second half of the season, because I think that's the one that we're most likely to upset and get a big win over. But you guys let me know what you guys think. Is Maryland's crowd a problem? I will talk about that after this ad from FanDuel. It's winner take all in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money locks, money lines, player props, and more. If you guys want to bet over on Anthony Edwards points tonight or over on Luka points tonight, you can do that on FanDuel. So make sure to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Maryland football and the atmosphere that Maryland football crowd brings is a current problem in college football. Now, this problem goes two ways for Maryland football, but I do think that the crowd kind of leads to some other problems for Maryland football. First of all, we don't have the biggest stadium ever. You should be able to fill up a good chunk of that stadium for games. When you look at, I know we're not the Bamas and the Ohio States of the world or Penn State. We don't have that kind of pedigree. We're not that type of program, and we're not going to fill up stands like those schools do. But if you want to be able to start competing with some of those schools, whether you're a Maryland student, whether you're a Maryland fan, whether you're a Maryland graduate and you're an alumni or whatever you are, if you want to be able to compete with some of these other schools, I think that Maryland's crowd has to go up. First of all, it gives you an advantage in the game. You can't tell me that Penn State at home at their whiteout game or whenever they have a home game or any big game they have an advantage because they have what you call the 12th man in college football. And when you have the crowd that makes all that noise and the college kid has to play quarterback or a college kid has to make signals or has to pay attention and you hear this roar of the crowd and it's really hard to hear and all these different things, it makes it hard on a kid that's 19, 20, 18 years old even maybe. Like, it makes it hard for them to play the quarterback position or whatever position it is on the field when you have that crowd and that factor in your program. And when Maryland football doesn't really have that, we don't get an extra advantage at our home games that some of the other teams have. Yeah, it's still nice to play at home. Yeah, you always will take playing at home, but we don't have some of that crowd noise. We don't have some of that, those penalties, some of those things that might happen where a quarterback might get rattled, might get nervous coming in to play at Maryland. Because when you look at it, when we played, I was at the Maryland-Michigan game last year, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, the Michigan crowd might be bigger than the Maryland crowd here. And so it's like the other team fans probably, and the other teams probably like playing at Maryland because they know that they're not worried about getting the crowd. They're not worried about the crowd noise and all those different things with the crowd in the stadium and all those things. And I think it's a somewhat of, it's not like a problem, but it's a problem that like it's something that you definitely want to get better at. It's not something that's going to like, I don't know necessarily it's going to win us a ton of games, but this part of it can, and how it influences the recruiting. And I've talked about that. When a player visits Maryland on their overnight, or their official, and they go to one of the games, one of the football games, and they have a bunch of guys there, and they're playing, let's say Maryland's playing Indiana at home or something, and the crowd's mediocre, and it's like, okay, like, this place is pretty cool, but I was just at Penn State, and their crowd was pretty amazing. Oh, I was just at Michigan, and that atmosphere was crazy over there, and they were just playing Bowling Green. Like, there's a difference between that in Maryland, and sometimes the recruits are not going to want to stay home or whatever when everyone's like, stay home, this guy's got to stay home, and it's on Coach Loxley. And I mean, yeah, like, you want more NIL money and all those type of things, but a lot of that starts with bringing in bigger crowds to the games where more people care about Maryland football. And it's tough because we lean towards being a basketball school for sure, but the football program's been in a pretty good spot these last couple of years. And there's other teams that haven't been nearly as good as us, and they still are able to get full crowds. And I'm not saying Maryland should be selling out every crowd, but when I was at the Maryland-Michigan game, it was a pretty sick atmosphere, but the fact that it was a sick atmosphere was because most of it was a bunch of Michigan fans that traveled to see the game. And so I'm just looking at this Maryland team and the Maryland crowd and the Maryland fans, and if we really want to take a next step, it might come down to having more people in the stands, having more people in the crowd. It's the small things that are going to allow Maryland football to take a next step as a program. It's something small, and I'm not saying it's going to make a huge difference, but I do think that it can change a couple things in recruiting, change a couple things in the gameplay, change a couple things that matter in the football and the whole football world overall. But that's just kind of my opinion on it. Let me know what you guys think. But thanks for listening to Locked On Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked On Terps.